Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. Unfortunately, Elisa Harlove couldn't be here with us, and I didn't want to disappoint you by canceling again. So I thought, why not take this opportunity to do a webinar about the Feldenkrais method and give you an idea about what it is, why I like it, and we'll do a little awareness through movement lesson, maybe a couple of little ones and then a longer one, so that you get a taste of the Feldenkrais method. So thank you, everyone, for joining me. And Dr. Lydia Gray has been kind enough to host this webinar.
I'm doing nothing else on a Friday night, you know.
Yeah, I know. Here we are on a Friday night with, Christmas weekend, and we're hanging out, doing this kind of thing. I am actually going to put this into a maximized screen just so that when we're doing some lessons and stuff, you can see me a little easier. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Feldenkrais method is so that you have an understanding of that. And in 1984, I had a horse flip over backwards and roll over me and punch my femur through my hip socket. And when I was laying in the hospital bed, Hunter Purdy gave me a Tellington Jones Equine Awareness newsletter. That newsletter changed my life because I read about Linda's work. And a year after my accident, I went to my first Tellington Jones Equine Awareness training in Wisconsin at Ellie Jensen's place. Linda had trained with Dr. Feldenkrais. So she had been a horsewoman for many, many years. She got burned out. She went to Germany. And while she was in Germany, somebody told her about Dr. Feldenkrais. So she came back to this country and she enrolled in his training, which was in San Francisco. It was in the 70s. And he only did 2 trainings in the United States. And there's a number of people that took that training in the 70s that are either practicing Feldenkrais practitioners or so we're still highly involved with the work many, many years later, including my trainer, David Zemuck-Burson. I took the training, the Guild training in 2001, 2004. And then I worked with Mia Siegel. And Mia Siegel was Dr. Feldenkrais' assistant for 15 years before he started training people. So I trained with Mia. I took her post-grad work. I took her master's program. Then I went back and did her foundation. So I trained with Mia quite a bit. I really liked Mia's style. She had spent a lot of time with Dr. Feldenkrais. And in fact, this book, which is called Awareness Through Movement, was written on her kitchen table. So I'm trying to remember, this copy is ancient. I probably bought it in the late 80s after meeting Linda and finding out about him and coming back. I was living in Virginia at the time because the bookstore I bought it from was called the Quest Bookshop in Charlottesville, and it's no longer there. So, I've been around this work since 85, and I really love it, and it's kind of changed the way I approach just about everything. So I went up and found this book, and while I was finding it, I found this I just flipped it open. And I just wanted to read you this tiny little bit. I have clearly highlighted and read and made notes and that sort of thing, but this is where I flipped it open to tonight. So Dr. Feldenkrais writes, "We stand without knowing how. We are thus not aware of any effort or activity in the muscles that work against gravity. We become aware of the anti-gravity muscles only when we either interrupt or reinforce them. That is, when the voluntary change is made in a clear awareness. The permanent contraction that is normally present before any intentional act is done is not registered by our senses. The electrical impulses, which derive from different sources within the nervous system, are involved. One group of those produces deliberate action. The other group causes contraction in the anti-gravity muscles until the work done by them exactly balances the pull of gravity." And I like I said, I just flipped it open and I grabbed that paragraph and I didn't even read it all the way. I just knew I wanted to share that with you because one of the things that I work with riders so much on is how much pressure they put against the stirrups. And this he talks about we're not aware of the muscles we use to stand. Well, those muscles, when our foot is in the stirrup, are acting and we put more pressure against the stirrup than we need because our nervous system is habituated. We're not even aware of it. And so in 2002, I had seen Linda put a plate under a person's foot in like 86, 87. And I was like, what is she doing? And then when I started my training, they showed a video of Dr. Feldenkrais working with a child that had cerebral palsy who couldn't stand. And he had him on a table, and he took a board and he placed the board against the child's foot. And he did that for a little while, and then he went on. And that reminded me of what I saw Linda do. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. What is he doing there? So at my next clinic, I started experimenting with what I call board under the foot, or grounding the foot. And in my 40 Jumping Fixes book, I have a chapter on this, about grounding the foot. And I worked with Mia Siegel about the text, the copy in the book, and to make sure we got it right. So she actually helped me with that, and I was so grateful for her. And the idea there is that your nervous system has a set point when you're doing something over and over again. And the action of standing, if you don't push against the floor, you will not stand. So you learn this at about 5 months of age, thereabouts. And the first thing you do before you stand is you grab and you pull, right? And you watch little kids, and they pull themselves up with their hands. And then they have to learn how to push themselves up from their feet. And if you do not figure out how to push yourself up from your feet against the ground, oh,
wow.
Okay, I guess
that was the magic word.
I guess so. I don't know what I did. But anyway, if you
is that just going to happen randomly?
Yeah, I think so. How to push your feet against the ground to stand, you won't stand. And of course, you've been doing that. Anybody who rides, almost anybody who's been riding for any length of time, you've been standing for much longer. So when you get in the saddle, you're not aware of how much pressure you're applying to the stirrup because it's so habitual. It's so unconscious. And then, of course, we're taught heels down, and everybody tries to cram their heels down and increases the pressure on the stirrup. The problem with that pressure on the stirrup, twofold. One, it stiffens all your joints. So the joints that are supposed to be able to absorb movement when you're riding, the hip, knee, and ankle, are no longer doing their job. And if you've ever watched anybody doing half pipe, BMX, snowboarding, you can see how important the hip, knee, and ankle are in absorbing the motion of the unstable surface or the unlevel surface or the half pipe or doing the flips and tricks. And in riding, it's equally important because that stirrup is attached to the stirrup leather. So when we push too hard against the stirrup, we're putting a lot of pressure on the stirrup bar. And of course, the saddle, being strapped to the horse's rib cage, is putting a lot of pressure where that stirrup bar is, which is right behind the shoulder. And since the horse does not have a collarbone, he only has muscles to be able to control the thoracic sling, the ability to lift the withers. When we push hard on the stirrups, we're putting pressure on the stirrup bar. It's pushing the horse's back down, and then we're trying to get him to bring us back up. And so we've made a conflict. We're not in agreement, as Mia would say, with the task that we want to do because we're unconsciously, habitually pushing too hard on the stirrup, either because we stand and don't know how much pressure we apply on the floor, and or we've been told heels down at all costs. We've lost the function of our joints. We've put the pressure on the stirrups. And if you have the hingy stirrups, what I know from watching this with a computer pressure pad underneath the saddle is that it increases the pressure on the stirrup bar even more. Of course, now we have this pressure on the stirrup, and what you have to think of as pressure is a function of area. So if I take the area of the stirrup to which I'm applying pressure and I reduce the surface area, the stirrup bar is much smaller, I have increased the pressure at the stirrup bar. So when I talk about pressure, like if you have a hose and you turn the knob and it's got a high pressure because it's got a small nozzle and you can spray the water really far. But if the hose has a bunch of leaks and a bunch of holes in it, you don't have any pressure at the end. So it's about how much force is applied to an area. And again, the stirrup is larger than the stirrup bar. So the amount of pressure that we're applying to the stirrup is increased when it gets to the stirrup bar because the area has decreased. Now, 5 pounds of pressure, which is not a lot, 5 pounds of pressure is damaging to tissue. So when you start to think about this whole thing about pushing and bracing and stiffening is putting a lot of pressure on the horse's back. And then, like I said, we want the horse to come up in his back. We wonder why he's got a sore back, or we wonder why he's got kissing spine, or we wonder why, fill in the blank, his head's in the air, or he won't turn because I'm pushing harder on one stirrup than the other. So all these factors influence our horse's ability to do what we want. And it goes back to doing things that we're not aware of, unconscious patterns. Does that make sense, Lydia?
It does, but I'm reading this message from this person, from Ellen Rusin. It says, is this going to happen tonight? Does anyone know? How can she write a message like that, it be in the meeting, the webinar, and then not? So I messaged her privately, can you not see and hear? Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Because I haven't heard anything back.
Okay. Sometimes it's the person at their internet connection, because I've got everything Ethernet connected now, and I upped my computer, so
I'll see. I'll just see if I hear anything back from her.
Okay, great.
So that was kind of your intro to what is Feldenkrais. I'm curious about what is Feldenkrais not. Like, I know we've talked about it's not exercise, right?
Right. So, in fact, Feldenkrais was kind of adamant about not calling his lessons exercise. We call them lessons. Exercise is something you do, the way I think of it is, you want to strengthen your muscles. So you go to the gym and you're doing exercise and you're exercising the muscle. But that doesn't mean you're doing it by paying attention. Now, you can exercise with awareness. You can go to the gym and really pay attention to when you're lifting. What are you doing with your shoulder? What are you doing with your head and neck? Are you crunching to lift, or are you just going for a maximum amount of weight and not really looking at how you're doing it? So the method is really, well, let's do one. Let's do a simple and easy thing to do. I'm just going to scoot back a little, and we're going to start with something super simple. Everybody clasp your hands. Okay. Now notice which thumb you have on top. So I happen to have my left thumb on top. That's my habit. Okay. So now I'm going to uncross my fingers and I'm going to re-intertwine them so that my right thumb winds up on top. Now, for many people, the first time they do this, they go, this feels so weird, or it feels wrong. But honestly, it's just different. Okay. So you can let that go for a moment. Clasp your hands your habitual way. Notice how that feels. Unintertwine your fingers and re-intertwine them with the other thumb on top. And now we've done it the second time. So Feldenkrais would call this the second approximation. And you let that go. Now, the letting go and rest is super important. And it's important for humans and it's important for horses, because the rest is what allows the nervous system to kind of process that little packet of information. So I kind of think of it as each time we do a movement, you're gathering a little packet of information. How am I doing that? What am I doing? If something's getting longer or shorter or higher or lower. And then in the rest, I can just let that go for a moment. It refreshes the brain. And then when we look at it again, it's like a new opportunity. So cross your hands again, cross your fingers again. Notice which thumb is on top. Again, my left thumb's on top. I'm going to unintertwine my fingers and re-intertwine them. And if you have to go really, really slow, that's totally okay. I'm going to re-intertwine them with my other thumb on top. So now I have choice. I can do it my habitual way or my non-habitual way. And I'm just going to go back and forth a few times. Okay. And you can go as slowly as you need to. It's not about rushing. You can go as slowly as you need to and just go back and forth a few times and then let it go and rest. So we'll give it a little moment. A rest can be as short as a pause, or it can be sleeping on it. When we train horses, how often, or just working on the computer, how often have you tried to do something and you just couldn't get it and you went to sleep and the next day you were like, oh, I know how to do it now. Mm-hmm. So in that rest, that's where our brain starts putting together these neurons, these dendrites, and making connections. And that's where we gain possibilities. We gain potential. So clasp your hands together again. Notice which thumb is on top. Again, my left thumb. But now I can switch back and forth easily, and it doesn't feel weird. So I have a choice. I can do it either way. In riding, having more choice is so important. I can't tell you how many riders come up to me and say, oh, I'm so right-handed, or my left leg is dumb. And I'm like, are you doing anything to educate it? Are you doing anything to make a change? Because your horse has to deal with your dumb leg or your stiff side or your, uncoordinated side, whatever you call it. He's having to cope with that. And then we expect him to go perfectly balanced left and right.
So it's just doing something to improve that. Be like, when I clean stalls, I clean 3 times with my right hand lower, and then I switch the fork and I clean 3 times with my left hand lower.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything we can do that makes us more, quote unquote, ambidextrous. Okay. Using the 2 sides of our body more equally is really important for riding. And so this is where the Feldenkrais lesson it's not about exercise. It's not about strengthening the muscles per se. It's about developing the awareness. Now you have choice. Okay. So that you can call upon whatever possibility you need in the moment of whatever you're doing. So if I often give the example of if I am teaching a rider and I have not given them the tools to spell WALK, right? If I haven't given them the letters of how to use their seat, when to ask, how to ask, what to do when the horse walks, then they're working with a faulty alphabet and they can't spell the letter very well. But if we increase their awareness and give them choice, now they can spell walk or halt or trot. And so often what I find is that my students have not been given the building blocks of conversation with horses. They're told to do something, do a shoulder in, but they're not taught how to do the shoulder in. And so they contort their bodies and they try to make their horse do this thing that they've been told they're supposed to do. And they watch their trainer who does it so beautifully, but the trainer doesn't know how they do it. And so with the method, the way I teach is I teach people the how. We break it down. And that's part of it, right? When we did this little exercise with our hand, I said, slow it down and chunk it down so that if you have to, you do 1 finger at a time. It's not about doing it fast when you're learning. It's about going slowly, chunking it down. Feldenkrais would call it differentiation. And then you reintegrate that into a whole. So he was an engineer. And if anybody's ever taken calculus, which I barely passed, you differentiate and then you find the area under the curve. Well, I think that's where his idea of functional integration, the private lesson part, functional integration came from, because he's integrating that curve. He's differentiating and then putting it back into a whole. So the method has 2 parts, and I think of it as a private lesson part and a group lesson part. And the private lesson is called functional integration. When I work with a student with functional integration, I typically use my Feldenkrais table. It's a low table. The person lays on the table. They're fully dressed. And I use my hands to move their body to discover what they're doing and then show them new possibilities. It's never forced. It should not be painful. Feldenkrais would call it nonverbal communication. So I'm connecting nervous system to nervous system. And my job is to explore what that person is doing to feel their pattern, match their pattern, not argue with it, match their pattern, and then explore any possibilities that arise from that investigation. In the same way, the group lesson part, the awareness through movement lessons, that's what this book is titled, Awareness Through Movement, is where you're guided through lessons verbally. So in my whole rider course, that's a lot of the basis of the lessons, is there's a lesson that I provide there where you follow the lesson, you lay on the floor or whatever starting position it is, you close your eyes, if it's a laying down position, and you follow the instructions, which we're going to do some here so you kind of get an idea, taste of it. And you discover your own possibilities. And it's so powerful. That when I was doing my training, it was like I'd get to class and they'd be, oh, we're going to do functional integration with each other. It's like, no, I want to do ATM. I want to lay on the floor and roll around and do self-exploration, because there's something so interesting about our own body being like a research lab. And we discover things that we didn't realize we were doing. And as soon as we discover them, we own them. So, these unconscious patterns, it's so, people can tell you you're doing something on your horse. Oh, your left hand is low. Okay, great. But if I don't know that my left hand is low, then when they're not there, my left hand is going to be low. Mm-hmm. In other words, until I have the autonomy of self-understanding, self-choice, self-awareness, and have possibilities, I'm at the mercy of what someone else is telling me. And I'm not even really in a dialogue with my horse. So, when I ride, I use this same philosophy when I ride, and it's like having a back and forth conversation. If my horse is doing something, say he's leaning on the left rein, I'm like, I'm going to just make sure, oh, did I lean with him or am I in the middle? Because if I leaned with him, he can't get back. We're all going. And so the first responsibility I have when I observe something in my horse is to check back to me, to myself, and go, well, am I in the right spot? Okay, yes, great. And what's surprising is very often if I take that moment to do that self-check, okay, am I in the middle? I check back with my horse and he's changed. Instead of my horse is leaning on the left rein and I got to start pulling on the left rein, I got to get him off the left rein. I start trying to use my leg and I get tighter and tighter and everything contracts. And he's like, I can't get off the left rein. You're putting me on it. When I watch riding lessons, and it's a little hard for me a lot of times, I'll be watching, even if it's a really good teacher, and I can see that the teacher keeps asking the student to get the horse to do something, but the rider isn't where the horse can do that thing. And the instruction is not on the rider, it's on the horse. And so everybody gets frustrated, and then the horse builds a lather up and they go around and round and round, and you don't see change because you haven't addressed where the rider is in space. And gravity is the law. If you don't align with gravity, how's the horse supposed to carry you if you're leaning? He's got to follow your weight, get on, hopefully not drop you on the ground. Most horses are really good and they try to follow, get underneath you, right? But then they can't do what you want because they're not in the balance to do it. And so this is where awareness becomes so important, that we really need to figure out what's our stuff. It's not about being perfect, because no one is perfect. I have injuries, other people have injuries. However, the injuries don't have to limit us to the degree that we often let them. So, I have 3 pins in my left hip socket, and I have 2 more pins where they reattached glute medius 3 years ago. But it doesn't limit, there's certain limitations I have with my left leg, but quite minor, because I've made sure that I keep working on myself to maintain my potential for movement, to maintain the ease with which I use the rest of my body and accept the parts that, okay, that I can't change today. Does that make sense?
So step 1 is the awareness piece.
Yeah.
Because what does Dr. Feldenkrais say? You don't know.
You can't do what you want until you know what you do. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then once you know, like I always raise my right hand, or I drop my left shoulder, or whatever it is you do, you are aware of those things as you're riding, and you ask yourself, is my horse not bending right because I'm all twisted up? And then you try to find the middle, as you say. that's one piece. The other piece is in between riding, you work on your body and trying to get it more less habitual and more thoughtful.
And discover possibilities. So, we don't come with a handbook when we're born. And not everybody crawls or walks the same. So everybody has their own development, right? Some kids run around barefoot. Some kids never get to go outside. Some kids have spent life in jolly jumpers. Others cross-crawled. Some didn't cross-crawl. So we don't come with a handbook. So we all developed in our own unique way. And riding requires, if we want to ride well, to have certain choices, like to be able to fully use this system that we have, this body. I've got my skeleton in the corner over there. This body of bones that has joints. So even it's not even just becoming more ambidextrous, but really discovering possibilities of movement and then employing those possibilities when we need them. So it's not even just for riding, really. I mean, riding, we're lucky as riders because the horse is the biggest biofeedback unit on the planet. And when we do something, he responds and it's like, wow, that's feedback. It's awesome feedback. But off the horse, we can do a lot of self-awareness so that it keeps the quality of life high. We're actually working on our riding, even if we're not riding. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I went to a training and I'd come back and my horse would say, "That's fabulous. Now go away and train some." And I hadn't been on a horse in months. So let's do another really quick little awareness through movement here. Everybody cross your arms. And when you cross your arms, notice how you cross them. So there are actually 4 possibilities. In my current possibility, this hand is up and this hand is down. But some people cross their arms like this, with both hands out. So we're going to learn all 4. If you started with both hands out, then we're going to change to the other possibility. So the arm that's under, you're going to slide it down, bring it over the arm that's still touching, the forearm, and just flip your hand up. So right now, this hand is underneath this arm. So I'm going to slide it out, swing it over, and now I have 2 choices. I can do it this way or this way. Okay, and then rest. So that's a less common way of crossing the arms than the one I'm going to show you next, which is the more common way. So cross your arms again, and you might be the person who has one hand tucked and one hand up. And this is my habitual way. Now, the thing to notice when I do my habitual way is that I have one shoulder higher than the other. Okay, so if I go around with my arms crossed like this all the time, and I tend to kind of keep my head to one side, now when I get on my horse, somebody's to say, "Oh, you're collapsing on your other side." Well, actually, I'm side bending, but that's another story. Okay, but I've been doing this habit for how long, and I'm standing there talking to people. It's cold, and I've got my arms tucked, and I'm shrugging my shoulder, and now I'm building this habit. And then I get on my horse, and somebody yells at me, "Your shoulder is up, or you're too high with your hand." Okay, and I am, because it's my habit. So here's our next possibility. The hand that is up, slide it out. Bring that arm over the other one, tuck the hand in, and flip your other hand up. So now you're crossed the other way. And notice my shoulder dropped. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to take the hand that's up, pull it out, swing it over, tuck it in, flip the hand up. So now I have 4 possibilities for crossing my arms. I can do it both hands out. This is my left arm on top. Both hands out, my right arm on top. One hand tucked, one hand up. Left hand is up. One hand tucked, one hand up. Right hand is up. So, yeah, and as soon as I did that, I was like, my shoulder's like, oh, I want to go down now. So these are just such simple little examples of awareness through movement. Like if you never pay attention to how you cross your arms and you're standing there talking to your friend at the barn and you're like, yeah, blah, 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 and you've got the purse on your shoulder and you're sitting like this, and that shifts your weight. And then you get on your horse and your horse is like, I'm going that way. And you're like, don't. But he's like, I have to. And then we're struggling with him, trying to correct him. So it's not that we aren't going to have patterns. And one of the things that I always think about is before I get on, just do a body check, a body scan. You know, where am I today? What have I got going on in my body today? Am I a little sore? Did I hurt my ankle or that sort of thing? Because when I get on my horse, I've got to be able to then distinguish, is this me or is this him? You know, if I know, wow, I hurt my ankle the other day and I'm kind of been favoring it and I've been shifting my weight to the left, and I get on my horse and he throws me to the right and does something weird, it's either that it's from me or something happened to him, and that's just as important in terms of information.
That's what I was going to ask you. How do you know when it's you or when it's the horse or when it's both?
Yeah. So the first thing is we have to have our own sense of where we are in space, right? Our own body map. That's really important. And then we, you know, and this is hard for people when they just get a new horse. This is always kind of they don't know, is it the horse? Is it them? Is it the environment? Is it the tack? You know, because so much has changed. So, you know, it takes a little while for that to settle out. But after a while, you'll start to see repeating patterns. Okay. And this is where journaling is really helpful, to write down your, you know, I noticed this today. I noticed it for the last 3 days. If I do a little surefoot, does it change? Yeah. Okay. Then maybe it's the horse. But starting to write down these repeating patterns and then having the exploration of, you know, if I sit in a different saddle, if I get on a different horse, if someone else rides my horse. And that's one way to start sorting out what's you, what's the tack, and what's the horse. Because until we can parse that out, figure that out, you know, what I find is a lot of women want to blame themselves. Oh, it's me. I'm just a terrible rider and I make my horse miserable. I'm like, wait a second. And some people want to just blame the horse. Oh, he's a bad horse. Oh, he's a stubborn horse. And it's like, no, you know, it's in the middle. We each have a part to play.
So Wendy, you were talking about journaling. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah.
Okay. So I buy this calendar, and it comes with a monthly thing so I can see. And then it also comes with daily things so I can write in there what happened. And so those ones, right? And then look at these days. You're like, oh.
Hang on, I'm going to just make this. Oh, there you go.
There's a lot of writing on those days.
Yeah.
But I've been doing this for 25 years. I have journals each year going back for all of my horses.
Awesome. Hey, Lydia, I can see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A there. Do you want to go over there and just see if there's anything important? Just,
I've only been listening to the chat.
Next to it says Q&A.
Well, the first one's, will it be recorded? And that's a yes.
Yeah.
The next question is about stirrups. We're told to keep a long leg and kind of feel stiff. And at times I'm losing my stirrup from one leg and canter. How to fix this?
Yeah. So, you know, here again, it's if your joints are stiff, how can you follow the motion of the horse? You have to remember that the saddle is strapped to the horse's rib cage. And in canter, the horse needs to move his rib cage a forward up direction. We're hoping he's going to do that. Otherwise, he's on the forehand. So if you're stiff and braced against the stirrup as he's moving, you're not moving with him. And therefore, you're going to lose your stirrup. And this is where the joints need to be able to move easily, not you moving them per se, but the horse has to be able to move them. And this is where I go back to things like skiing and snowboarding and half pipe, because when you watch these people, they have to respond to they take the half pipe and they swing up and they have to close their joints and then they do their trick. And then as they come down, they've got to follow the board. Well, they can't have their joints stiff to follow the board. And in the same way, you can't have your joints stiff to follow your horse. And this is where this idea of stillness on a moving object gets a little weird because, if you're on a boat on the water and you get rigid, you're going to have a hard time following the boat as it's going over the waves. In the same way, if you're rigid on the horse, you're going to have a hard time going with the horse's movement. So stillness is actually an illusion. It's that you're moving with the horse. So my example, if this is my horse and this is me, okay, if my horse is moving, my hand has to go with it. But if I stiffen, I get banging, and the horse doesn't like that banging, by the way. So that there again, it's the term that we're using of stiffness in your joints that doesn't make sense, because those hip, knee, and ankle joints really are the shock absorbers of our body. And if we want our backs to feel happy, not feel stressed, those joints need to be absorbing the movement of the horse. Yeah. Okay, so we've done a couple of things, and I want to do one more. This one's going to be a little bit longer. Hopefully you can all sit. I'm going to scoot my stool back so that you can see me. Ta-da! Great. Okay, and I wore the appropriate color shirt so you can see that. So just find a comfortable place to sit. You want to sit up a little bit, so that you've got your seat square. You don't want to be sloping way back or sitting too far forward, but just kind of finding the middle. And just let your arms rest on your thighs. And when you do that, just notice the position of your hands. So some people might be resting palm up, some might be resting palm down, some might be resting palms facing each other. And so just take a moment to kind of organize yourself, sit away from the back of your chair, let your arms rest on your thighs, okay? And just close your eyes and notice your breathing for a moment, okay? And so a body scan is just a way to do that little pre-check that, where am I today? So just take a moment to notice your breathing, any tension in your neck or your shoulders, and observe if it feels like one shoulder might be higher or lower, or more forward, meaning toward the front of the body, or more back. And then very, very slowly begin to, with a softly, not a tight closed hand, but not an extended hand, with a semi-closed hand, if you will, just the right hand, just start to roll it a little bit. So you're going to rest the arm on your thigh, but you're just going to roll it so that the thumb goes a little away from midline and back to midline. Just do what's easy. So just do what's easy is such an important directive in the Feldenkrais method. If we work hard and we force it, then we're not going to feel things as much. It's going to take a lot more to feel. So as you reduce effort, it increases your sensitivity. So just do that very gently. And as you roll that hand a little bit so the thumb goes to the outside and then it comes back into the inside, just notice where else you can feel this movement. So you might notice it in the elbow. You may notice something in your shoulder. You may feel something up in the neck area. And just do what's easy. And then leave that and rest. And in the rest, if you want to sit back against your chair or lay on the floor, it's all okay, right? It's all fine. Okay. And then when you're ready, come back to your starting position. Again, with your hands resting on your thighs. And again, with the right hand, just roll it a little bit so the thumb goes a little out, away from midline and then in. And just notice, from having done that tiny little movement and having a very short rest, if that hasn't changed the ease of the movement, the quality, perhaps the amount of movement. And again, if you feel that it starts to get resistant, like you feel, oh, it's sticky, come back. So it's not about forcing. And this is where, again, it's not exercise. We're needing to bring our attention to what we are doing and work within a range of ease. Dr. Feldenkrais, Mia used to talk about this all the time. It's like we so often don't even know what the word ease means anymore. We lose it because lives are so busy and they've been so stressful, and just let that go and rest. And we've been through the pandemic and all that other stuff. And, as horse people, we're very busy people. We've got a lot to do. And so we lose the sense of ease. And yet when we ride, that's what we want, right? And we want our horses to be calm and relaxed. We want them to be in parasympathetic, rest and digest so that they can, not be stressed. And our nervous system also requires that. Our nervous system needs to find ease and find rest. But to do that, we've got to kind of take a moment to slow things down and do things small and gently so that we can observe. So come to your starting position again. Once again, roll the right hand and just notice if you can go a little farther or a little bit easier, or is it a little more fluid? And just feel where you can let go of some tension, perhaps in your jaw or your throat or the side of your neck. And just notice if that makes that even easier. Notice your breathing. When do you breathe in? When do you breathe out? And let that go and rest. And so it's not about, that you have to take a deep breath. So many people were taught all the different breath techniques, which is fine. But in this, we want to use the breath as a way to sense ease. So, when you watch a child sleeping or, somebody who's relaxed, they're not paying attention to their breathing. It's just happening. It's a beautiful system. It's a semi-autonomic system. We can influence it, but it also happens all on its own, which is a good thing. And so it's just paying attention for a moment to notice that. Is your breath coming easily or is it forced? And then once again, return to your starting position with your hands resting on your legs. Once again, roll the right hand and just notice now, can you go a little further with less effort? I certainly notice that I can. If you can't, that is just as important an observation as if you are going further. In other words, taking the moment to observe is the key to change. Taking the moment to observe and going, nope, this isn't any better, is just as important as, oh, okay, I can go a little further. Because until we notice, until we have that awareness, nothing can change. So if you find that, you're doing something and it's like, well, I don't feel any difference, fine. Notice that you noticed you're not feeling any difference. It really goes back, he was a engineer and he worked in Madame Curie's laboratory and obviously physics and that sort of thing. And what we've learned with quantum physics is that the observer is critical to the experiment. In other words, and this goes back, if the tree falls in the woods and there's nobody here to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, the observer, you in this experiment, rolling your arm, is critical to the observation, which can allow change. So if you're going, well, I don't feel any difference, then you have observed and you've noticed, and that's the important part, because you cannot change something that you haven't observed. And if you can go a little further and it's easier, it's like, wow, cool. I just did this for like a couple of moments and suddenly my hand is moving so much better. And then just see if you can go a little quicker, not fast, but just a little quicker. And where do you have to let go to roll your soft hand a little bit further? Now, one of the reasons I picked this lesson is because we spend so much time on our phones, texting, right? And we're on our computers and we're typing and we're driving our cars. And so our arms get really kind of stuck. Our forearms can get really stuck. And when we're riding, we need that kind of flexibility to send a nice little signal down the rein to the horse's mouth. So with this lesson, we're just looking at, well, how much ease can I have with my hand and my forearm? And if you want to feel, you can take your other hand and just place it up near the elbow, not quite up to the elbow, and just rest your arm again and slowly roll your soft fist and feel there's movement of the two bones in the forearm that influence the elbow. And when you roll the hand in one direction, you can start to feel the elbow move in one way. And when you roll the hand in the other direction, you feel it go in a different direction. So for me, and the thing is, it may not be for you, but for me, when I roll my hand palm down, I can feel my elbow start to move away from my body. And when I roll my hand palm up, I can feel my elbow come into my body. And so I'm just noticing, okay, when I can feel it with my hand, and I can feel it in my arm, and I can feel the movement in my elbow, and oh wow, I'm starting to feel this up in my shoulder, and I can even feel it in my ribs. Now, so many people want to talk to me about, oh, I collapse on one side. And I'm like, first of all, if you've collapsed, you're probably like, to me, that's a building that's falling down. And I hope that hasn't happened to you, especially in a hip. People don't have a collapsed hip, and I have no idea what they're trying to say. But second of all, you know, as you're doing this simple little movement of your arm, you might notice that the shoulder is changing, but there's an sympathy throughout the system, throughout your body. And so as you start to play with that rolling, you might notice that the ribs start to move and they start to shift. Okay. One side starts to get longer while the other side gets shorter. So I don't think of it as a collapse as much as my ribs now are moving, and they're moving in response to what my arm is doing.
We had a question come in, Wendy.
Yeah.
This person says she's still coming back from a broken collarbone, and that shoulder joint now seems to be rotated in and forward. Any suggestions?
So, you know, just this kind of lesson is Feldenkrais is lovely. The thing about collarbones, I'm just going to slide up here for a minute. You know, how am I going to put this? Depending on how it heals, because sometimes the collarbone can return to its original length, and sometimes it's actually shortened. And I don't know about her break, and I don't know if she has metal and that sort of thing. But what happens is we start to, I don't know if I can grab Elmer here. Hang on. I'm going to see if I can grab him off of his post. Yep, here I am. You know, and this is the kind of thing I go through in the whole rider courses. I really help people understand their anatomy, because that is so critical to all of this, right? Understanding our anatomy. So, you know, here's your collarbone. Your shoulder blade's back here. This is the top of the shoulder blade. Here's your shoulder joint. But the thing is, depending if this bone has been shortened, that's different than if it's just had a crack and it's healed and it's still at its full length. And the tendency is that we start to be empathetic, right? And we might be in a sling, and we're kind of, I might do this with his other shoulder, which I think is going to be more. You know, we start to get empathetic, and the whole thing starts to roll forward. But more importantly, we start to the ribs start to get closer together. And the ribs are what supports the shoulder. So if the ribs are getting closer together and everything's dropping down, the whole shoulder girdle is going to roll forward. So this is where is it really the collarbone? And this is something we can't go into dissecting it all tonight with her, but you know, that's the kind of thing we do in the whole rider course. Is it really the collarbone that's causing this, or is it what's happened as a result of the collarbone break? Because this whole shoulder girdle just sits over these ribs. And if we're not aware of what we're doing with the ribs, then we're constantly trying to pull the shoulder back and creating a lot of tension up in the neck, a lot of tension in our back, a lot of tension in our shoulder. And then we fatigue and it goes right back because we haven't put the structural support back in. Does that make sense? Yeah, Lydia?
It does to me. I'm not saying anything from Rebecca, but I never, you know, when you are struggling with something, you get hyper focused, laser focused on that thing. So, and you focus right on the collarbone, but you dissected it down and said it's actually a broader issue. Think about your ribs, you know?
Yeah, and that's really true, is that we get hyper focused on this one thing. The doctors do, everybody does, and then we forget about the rest of the body, and then it works as an organized whole. Right? Same thing with the horse. We get so hyper focused on getting one little piece of something, we forget it's connected to this entire body. And until we start to look at it globally, like, okay, that's the piece that hurts, but is that really what's going on? Then,
okay, here's some feedback from Rebecca. She put it in the chat. She's making me work. Okay, she said it is shorter by 6/10 of an inch, maybe. That's a lot. Maybe 0.6 centimeters. I don't know. It is shorter. Let's just go with that.
Right. So it's never going to be like one that isn't. Okay.
Scar tissue, no bone bridge or plate. She's 4.5 months in. And she said she also broke 3 ribs under it. So. And
so this is where, we have to maximize the function and the rest of the body when we have something like that, because that, if it's shorter, we're not going to make it longer, but we can have everything else working better around it. So an example is that in my Feldenkrais training, I had a friend who had the same kind of injury as I did. The femur rammed through the hip socket and broke out the socket, except that it was in a car accident at high speed. So it shattered her socket, whereas mine was only just some chunks kicked out. And she had years and years of developing bone spurs and everything all around that. And so she couldn't use that leg. I was lucky. And she, I remember watching her walk, but what she did learn to do is use the whole rest of her body so amazingly well that she could, in large part, offset what she couldn't do there. And that's where Feldenkrais is so brilliant, because it's about not leavening. Mia would always say, why let 5% of your body rule 95%?
Ooh.
Right? That's a quote I love from her. Why let 5% of your body rule 95%? If we can get the other 95% working at a really very ease and efficiency and using all the possibilities, then that piece there, okay, fine. Nothing's 100%. But we tend to focus on the thing that's not working, and then it rules everybody, right? It rules the whole show. And it takes over. So I would just say, she's got some healing to do, and obviously you've got to let things heal, but at the same time, it's like really exploring the possibilities of movement with the rest. And that's, because of my accident, I do what I do, and I learned about Feldenkrais. I always see it as a gift. It was pretty horrendous, and I had no physical therapy when I left the hospital. I had to find people to help me rehab, because they didn't provide me with anything when I left. But that journey is what makes me really good at working with people with injuries, and fear and limitations and struggles, and, instructors that have told you stuff that you just can't get done, because I had to figure it out for myself. And I had to figure out what works and why it works and how it works. And because I have a scientific background, I always apply that scientific principle. That's why I really love Dr. Feldenkrais, because he was a scientist. The other kind of somatic education technique that's used a lot with riding is called the Alexander technique. But the difference is the roots. Alexander was an orator. He would get on stage to speak. And so he lost his voice. And so he studied himself in mirrors, which was pretty incredible, pretty smart. And he noticed that he had to organize his head and neck in a certain way to be able to project his voice. And so he developed what's called the Alexander technique. But Dr. Feldenkrais was an engineer. He was a judo master. He was a scientist, and he looked at the body and he said, you have 206 bones, and you have 5,000 different possible ways to combine those bones into movements. So why limit yourself to these few movements? And I think that that's really the key for riders, is that so often they're limited in their possibilities, that they watch the good riders who are not so limited, who have more possibilities, and they see the horse just do amazing things. And then that rider gets back on who's limited because they haven't explored possibilities, and they don't get the same result. But the instructor is so unaware of what they're doing, they can't help that rider, because they don't realize you know, and that's the natural rider is just, they're beautiful to watch, but they're not always good teachers. It's not that they don't want to tell you what they're doing. They just don't know.
So here's a question for you, Wendy. If there's 5,000 possibilities of movement, and I've heard you say that before, what do you do every day to make sure your body doesn't just find the path, the 7 movements that it wants to do, and just fall into the habit? I mean, that's the struggle, is we can't do 5,000 movements every day. So how do you keep your body available and all these possibilities possible without doing everything every day?
Well, the thing is, I think of it as every time we do a little awareness through movement, it's like a piece of colored tissue paper. And if you've ever seen a stack of colored tissue paper, it becomes translucent and you see all the colors coming through. And so I think of every time I do a little awareness through movement, it's like another layer. Okay. And then it builds upon, the layers build upon each other. So just doing this little one, like one of the reasons when I picked this lesson of rolling the fist is I've been spending a lot of time on the computer lately. And I woke up in the morning and I was like, oh, my arms and hands feel really stiff. And I went, oh yeah, because I've been doing this all day long. And so I thought, well, wow, rather than just go, oh, maybe I'm getting carpal tunnel syndrome. I was like, well, wait a second. I know I can do this little ATM of rolling my fist, sitting on, with my hand on my thigh. I can do that with one hand driving, maybe, as long as you're safe. Or I can take a break from the computer and just do that and go, wow, I didn't realize it was so stiff. Like what I've already discovered just doing this lesson with you is like, I was like, wow, yeah, okay. And the more I just played and then rest and played and rest, now suddenly my arm is moving freely again. So it's not that we're not going to have things happen to us, and we have stuff happen all the time. Dr. Feldenkrais said that health was the ability to recover. And so, okay, so I've lost that movement, but can I recover it? Can I get it back? Yeah, I can get it back. I just did like 2 minutes with you guys and I got it back. And I've purposely only done one side right now because I want to create that contrast in you. Mm-hmm. So this is another really great strategy, is that by just doing the one and then resting, and you might go out and, walk out the door tonight and grab the doorknob and go, wow, that was really easy. And then you grab with the other hand and you go, oh, that's not so easy. Well, that's exactly what you need to bring in awareness, contrast. So by just doing the one tonight, and then you can always do the other one whenever you want later, but by just doing that one, we create some contrast, and then that triggers the nervous system, brings in that awareness. It's like, oh, it captures you, because our body wants symmetry. It seeks symmetry. So we can play with this little bit of changing one side or changing one thing, and then the nervous system process. It's the same as like here, we notice that, oh, we're doing it one way all the time. Okay, so once you bring in that awareness, I brought in choice with that one, but this with the rolling fist, it's like we're just doing that one side so that you can experience the difference, right? And then you can realize that, wow, I didn't know I was holding that much in my forearm. I've been spending a lot of time on the computer, and then I can either do the other side or the other side's going to catch up, because your brain is so smart. We so underestimate our brain. We so underestimate our capacity. We so underestimate our potential. And I think I find so many people that, oh, that's just the way, oh, it's like, no, your brain is smart. You are smart. You just have to employ it.
Mm-hmm. All right, where should we go next? You answered the question. I was going to ask you, what other sports, activities, hobbies either use or benefit from Feldenkrais? And you mentioned the first that came to my mind was the skiing. I find a lot of parallels between skiing and riding. And I know in the Sally Swift's book, she compares them.
Yeah, because you have to be able to absorb the movement, right? If you're skiing down the hill and you stiffen, you're going to eat a lot of snow. So, and I love functional types of exercise. When I say functional, it's like you have to realize muscles train really specifically. So, if you go and you do one type of exercise and you get really good at that, that's what you're really good at. But if you then go to another type of exercise, you won't be so good because the muscles train so specifically. So that's why I'm always cautioning my students to pick exercises and activities that support their riding. In other words, ballet, if you're really good at ballet and external rotation and extension, may not be what you want when you ride. And so, it's like, at a certain point when I get people who are serious runners, I'm like, you've got to make a decision here because your running is shortening your calf muscles and lifting your heel and tightening you in places, and riding is asking you to do the opposite. Now, can someone do both? Sure. But it means you have to pay more attention to, just like we did with the forearm, am I holding in those muscles that I use for running when I get on my horse? Can I let them go? If I can't let them go, then I'm going to, it's going to get me in trouble. So that's where Feldenkrais would say, well, you have the potential to do both. You just have to be able to access the different patterns and use them appropriately and know when to let them go. I had a Olympic level speed skater as a student once, a riding student, and she had quads that were like OMG, right? Like OMG. But, I came over to her and I was like, just checking the quality of her muscles. And she's like, yeah, my coach, he would come by and he'd check that my legs were jiggly. He wanted those muscles to completely decontract because that's how they're going to recover. So if the muscle stays in too much contraction, it's not going to recover well from activity. So that's where making sure that we have that ability to let go and then use, and let go and use it again.
You mentioned ballet maybe not being a great because of the way that they hold the external rotation and the leg, but ballroom dancing is another sport that I see a lot of parallels with riding, in that you work with a partner and you have to be sensitive.
Yeah, I actually took ballroom dancing for a while. Bettina Drummond said, you've got to go take ballroom dancing. And I was living in Connecticut at the time, so I took lessons from her teacher. Yeah. And there are a lot of parallels. The most important one for me was I was not in charge. He would shake me and say, stop. You had to leave me. And I was like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know that people have, I was somewhere, must have been on the whole rider course, and people, you get asked this all the time, and they were asked you there, what things can I do to make myself a better rider? And everyone wants to do squats or things that bulk up their quads, I guess thinking it'll help me post. But you told them that maybe it wasn't the best thing to do.
Yeah, you've got to be really careful how you do squats. And so, the way they're taught more typically these days is to not let your knee go over your toes, which means you have to go into extension in your low back, which is not what you want for rising trot. So I'm not going to go into it tonight about how to do that, but basically you've got to be careful about looking at the activities that you're doing to get stronger in relation to that movement that you want on the horse. And that's, we go into that a lot in the whole rider course because it's so important. And this is, again, where I like functional kind of exercise as opposed to routine that is too linear, I think is probably one way to say it. Where we go for the strength and somebody was like, I can bench press 180 pounds. It's like, okay, why? I mean, it's great. If you want to do that, that's fine. But in terms of improving your riding, the horse is the one who's supposed to do the movement. And we are the ones who's supposed to give him directions to move. So I always refer back to the fact that, if it was all about strength, little kids couldn't ride because they don't have the big, bulky external muscles. They have the little internal postural muscles. And that's really the unsung heroes of riding, is those little postural muscles that are anti-gravity muscles, if you will, that support us in gravity, that are so critical to riding.
Here's a question. For ankle and knee, how balanced and stable on horse and not be stiff, I think is what she means. Like how do you find that balance between being stable and still and functional but not stiff?
You know, it's true of anything. It's like, first you have to become aware of what you're doing. And then it's so many people, what I find is they've got the joints braced, so they can't respond. They can't move. Right. And so I always tell people, you know, the best thing to do is experiment. You know, we get so locked into trying to get it right, and trying to get the yes from our instructor, as opposed to taking a moment to explore and to give ourselves the chance to go. I always talk about the Goldilocks principle. This is too much. This is too little. This is just right. Is to explore and have a quiet conversation with the horse, allowing him to give you feedback instead of always telling him what he's supposed to be doing. You know, I think so many riders get into telling the horse what he's supposed to be doing and never taking the moment to have a conversation or a dialogue. When I do this, what do you do? If I lift my heels, do you go better? If I jam my heels down, do you go worse? Or do you, you know, we have to be willing to experiment and explore and not worry about getting it right in that moment, and not worry about, oh, I'm going to ruin my horse. Because the minute you think you're not going to ruin your horse, you don't want to ruin your horse, you've ruined your horse. Okay. The minute you think, I don't want to ruin my horse, you have ruined your horse, because life is not perfect. What's important is resilience. And resilience means making a mistake and recovering and learning from the experience. And if we build resilience, and I don't actually, that takes us into a whole nother line of conversation, but this whole idea of desensitization, I don't buy it. I believe in education and trust. And so if my horse and I have been through different experiences and he can learn to trust me, if I say this is okay, he's like, okay, I'll try it. Okay. As opposed to trying to desensitize him to everything, because you never will. But if I can develop that trust, and yeah, if I have a bad experience, if something bad happens, we recover, we heal the relationship. And whether it's a person or a horse, you know, stuff's going to happen. It's just going to happen. And then, you know, we have to build that experience of stuff happens and it's okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, or you're sorry, you didn't mean to, you know, and it's okay. And we can go on. And I think so often we're looking for this all or nothing. My horse is bomb proof. It's like, that doesn't exist. It's a horse.
I wanted to ask this a while ago, but I'll throw it in now. So have you found that there are many or any physical therapists or rehab centers that incorporate Feldenkrais? It seems to make sense, but the physical therapists I've had have not.
Yes. I mean, is it everywhere? No. And can I tell you who is using Feldenkrais? No. I do know that the physical therapist that I know, who's a good friend, and she's also a Feldenkrais practitioner, she is a physical therapist and she uses Feldenkrais, but it's not as common as I'd like. I wish it was more accepted in the medical field, or more known. I mean, I just think that it so enhances the recovery process. So you just have to look around and ask around. Yeah.
And then it makes me think, don't laugh, but is there such a thing as Feldenkrais for horses? Because I feel like some of the body workers that come out, they show the horse, did you know you can move your leg or your ribs or your neck like this? And sometimes my horses would get like mad at them, angry. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, I can.
So I am a Feldenkrais practitioner and I work on horses. Okay. So there are some Feldenkrais practitioners that work on horses. There are some body workers that use Feldenkrais-like concepts, but I can't say that they're trained in the method. Mm-hmm.
So it is a thing, though.
Oh yeah, I give horses. Linda, that's what Tellington Jones Equine Awareness Method is. Okay. You know, she was doing Feldenkrais on horses, absolutely, and I work on horses, and I love working on horses. In fact, the horse that I discovered Surefoot with, I had met him 3 years prior, and he was essentially broken, and she would bring him to me and I would give him Feldenkrais lessons. And if she brought him, I would have to work on him. He would insist. So for me to give her a Feldenkrais lesson, she had to come on her own. He was so cute. And that's actually where Surefoot came from, is straight out of the Feldenkrais method, for sure. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally rooted in the concepts of Feldenkrais. It was just an experiment that worked. And we can talk about that on another webinar, but it comes from my training as a Feldenkrais practitioner. So Lydia, we've kind of gone on for a little over an hour. I think probably it's a good place to wrap it up. I just wanted to let everybody know that, we have the whole rider course, and we've released we're releasing a series of 3 videos, actually 4. We've let the first one out, which is riding with awareness. And then we have riding with ease and riding with joy. They're free. We'll be sending out an email. If you haven't gotten on that list, you can go to thewholerider.com and sign up so you get those videos. It'll give you a little more information about how I view finding that harmony with your horse. And of course, we'll be opening up the whole rider course very soon. And if you want to learn more and actually dive in and dig into the Feldenkrais method with me in this 8-week course, we would love to have you. It's really nice because it gives me a way to reach people that I couldn't normally reach, because I just can't travel everywhere. And so here, the magic of Zoom lets us be able to bring everybody together and go on this journey where we discover greater harmony with our horse. So I hope you will join me there. It's been great. And Lydia, thank you so much for being my hostess. It's fabulous.
Practice stuff. I practice it all night.
Yeah, you can do that, and your arms crossed, and then you can find out what's happened with your little arm rolling. So everybody's homework assignment is to notice the difference and then do the other arm. And it's just, I want to thank everybody for giving this opportunity to talk to you about Feldenkrais method. It changed my life, truly changed my life, and provided me with not only a tool to help my own body, but to help my students and to just as a way to approach life. It's great. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for sharing your evening with me.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.